Sing along with us if you want to.
I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, hallelujah.
Thank you, choir and John. Hallelujah. Our sermon is on justice, and I had decided that they sent me 3 that they had done. They're doing this series on this 5 smooth stones, which they'll discuss a little bit. But I was going to use 2 of them, and I decided just to move on over and do justice, because we need a sermon on justice. Need to think about justice. So they've entitled this, "Let Justice Roll Down Like Waters." And they refer to a covenant. And you'll hear that this is the covenant for the southern region, where they use the 5 smooth stones, which will be explained to you: hope, love, justice, courage, joy. And so we need to have a word on justice, have a conversation about justice. And that's what Connie and Carlton do for us today. So here they are. Let justice roll down. Reverend Carlton Elliott, I didn't put his whole name, Smith, and Connie Goodbread, that he'll forgive me too.
Good morning. I'm Connie Goodbread. I am one of the co-leads of your Unitarian Universalist Southern Region Congregational Life staff team, and I live in Palm Harbor, Florida.
And I'm Carlton E. Smith. I live in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and I too am part of the Southern Region Congregational Life team.
So this morning we're going to start by explaining to you a little bit about the covenant that we've been sharing with you the past couple of sermons. This covenant is grounded in the 5 smooth stones of liberal religion, which was an essay written by James Luther Adams. James Luther Adams was a great theologian, and he was ours. We have been working with that essay for about 15 years, and slowly we have been reading it and living with it and taking it apart, deconstructing it in some ways to come to, what is it, the essence of what James Luther Adams was saying about the kinds of things that we need to hold in our hearts and have ready to amplify in the world in order to create more love and justice. And so we love to simplify. And it's not that these concepts are simple concepts, but they're simple to say. And so the 5 smooth stones that we hold in our hearts are hope, love, justice, courage, and joy. And so the covenant that I'm going to read to you is grounded on those foundational values of Unitarian Universalism. And this is the covenant. With hope for a bright future, I come in trust. With love in my heart for all of creation, I come in humility. Seeking justice for all, marginalizing none, I come in open-mindedness. With courage, I come willing to be transformed. With great joy, I come to bind myself to you so that together we can do what I cannot do alone. The line that we're going to be focusing on this morning is seeking justice for all, marginalizing none. I come in open-mindedness.
And the title of this sermon is Let Justice Roll Down Like Waters. And that title is borrowed from a song in our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, We'll Build a Land, where it says, justice shall roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream. And it's taken from a biblical verse attributed to the prophet Amos. And I should also mention that this is a dialogical sermon, as you might have noticed, in which we are creating this time together, this sharing, these insights as we go along. We believe that the spirit of the divine, that God, if you will, spirit of the universe, lives inside of our conversations as well as all around us and within us. And we believe that there's going to be some wisdom and insight that emerges from us as we are sharing with you in this exchange back and forth, and pray that it will be something that will be enriching for you as you're listening to us.
And enriching for us. We're changed by this every time, Carlton. It's wonderful. So as we begin, I love this quote by Cornel West, and it actually speaks to the last 2 dialogical sermons that we've done. But he says that justice is the public face of love. And I'm wondering how you connect those 2 things, love and justice.
Yes, so love and justice for me has to do with the acknowledgement that we can only do justice when we have love in our hearts, not just for ourselves, not just for the people that we care about, not just for our family members and our friends and our other people in our tribe, but also for people who are outside of our immediate circle of care. And so I think about my involvement with the Living Legacy Project. I serve on the board of that organization now. And it does tours and pilgrimages throughout the historic South to civil rights sites from the 1950s and 60s especially. We have a chance to meet with those brave souls who were on the front lines of that movement for justice at the time, and also their descendants, and to visit those places where so many historic events took place, including Selma, Alabama, and Birmingham, and so many other places. And I think that it's just so important to remember the spirit of what they were doing and talking about at that time, because they couldn't be working for justice and making a demand for justice if they weren't committed to that spirit of love. The fact is that when injustice is present, it not only has a negative effect on the people who are being oppressed, but it also has a negative effect on the people who are doing the oppressing, because the diminishment of any one person's humanity diminishes all of our humanity. And if we're going to do justice work in the world, and we want that justice to be abundant, that's why we want it to flow like waters, we want it to spill over into every area and aspect of our lives, we have to be willing to do it with a spirit of love. And that's how we'll ultimately come to a place where we do have the experience of everyone having what they need, everyone being treated fairly. And that's the thing that we're striving for as Unitarian Universalist.
Is everybody being treated fairly? Yes. So, I go to the piece of the covenant that says marginalizing none. One of the things that I want to say is that this particular covenant is aspirational. We don't ever, an aspirational covenant is not achievable. We break it over and over again. And so I wonder at times, if we look to ourselves, we don't look at other religions, what we consider to be injustices that have been carried out by other religious organizations. If we look to ourselves to try to become more, better, marginalized, few, if any, be as open-minded as possible if we're actually trying to do that work. What are the things that we need to look at inside of Unitarian Universalism to make sure that we are evolving and becoming the people that we are being called at this moment to be? Covenant is the first thing, of course, that pops into my head. And it is that if, in fact, we are ever misusing covenant, if we're manipulating people by even writing a covenant, sometimes we choose to write a covenant of right relations rather than deal with people on an emotional level. So something is going wrong, and I begin to write rules that I say is a covenant. And those rules are meant to pull people back into line, into behaviors that I want to see happening so that I'm comfortable. So discomfort is not pain. Pain is very, very real. And so the things that we do to one another that could be painful, that are painful, when one of our siblings says, you are causing me pain, it is our job to look at what we're doing. It is our job as a covenantal people to look to ourselves when something is broken, well before we ever say, you are out of covenant. We have to say, I am out of covenant. I think that in our culture, we're experiencing right now a global pandemic that is, it is both, it divides us in many ways, but it also makes us see that we are one. We are all connected. So it's our seventh principle actually in play. And I see pain all around me, all kinds of pain, genuine pain, grief, anticipated grief, loss, all of that is happening. And it can make us cranky with one another, or it can make us one. And so there's a wonderful balancing that can happen for us as human beings with one another. You have this wonderful way, you spoke about balance in the last thing that you just said about the fact that if you have a victim and you have a victimizer, both of those human beings are being affected by the behavior that is being shared between them in this incredibly horrible sharing. But you have this wonderful way of talking about balance. Would you talk a little bit more about it? Balance?
Sure. So balance, yes, it's just such a critical thing to maintain balance. I was messaging back and forth with a Facebook friend not that long ago, and I was talking about how I was dismayed by the fact that we have this metaphor of war that's being used in relationship to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this Facebook friend responded, well, it's the fact that in Western culture that we really don't have a way of thinking about these issues in terms of balance and balance being restored, that we can only think in terms of enemies and warfare. And again, we have that situation where we're talking about some lives are more valuable than others. If you think about it, anytime there's a war, it's like we hear about the American casualties, the American soldiers who might have been killed, but do we ever hear anything about all of the civilians and all of the other people who were engaged in conflict whose lives are lost in the warfare? No, we don't hear about them. So with regards to balance, that is what justice means to me. And as we see so often, justice is represented by what? By the scales. And the scales inside of a just situation are evenly balanced. That's what is so alarming as we're in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, is that we see just so many imbalances everywhere we go. Now, we were already greatly imbalanced with regards to the economic distribution, the wealth gap on so many levels. And now we have just a very few people within our country who have access to, and not just access to, but who own so much and have so much exorbitant wealth that they're going to be minimally affected by the pandemic. They've got ways of protecting themselves. Meanwhile, we have people on the other end of the scale. So this is the people who have the most, people who have the least, still have to go to jobs because they can't afford not to work, still don't have access to health care, still don't have the food that they need to be able to feed their families. And so all of this, some of them don't have shelter. So all of this is not fair, it's not just. And so my hope is, and my prayer is that on the other side of this pandemic, and while we're going through it, that we might do that serious soul searching that you were talking about before, where we look inside of ourselves to see where are we being unfair? Where are our blind spots where we're not being just and fair to other people? So that as we come through this and to the other side, that we'll have a greater mind to care for one another and to balance those scales of justice so that everybody can have what they need.
May it be so, Carlton. May it be so.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connie.